A very good evening to you all. On behalf of the Hansard Society, I'd like to welcome you here tonight to Young People's Question Time. It's fantastic to see such a turnout tonight. This is the second year running that we have run this event as part of Parliament Week, and we are delighted yet again to see such a crowd. Please bear with us. We will have more people joining us this evening, and they will be coming in through the back. A very big thank you to Krishnan Guru Murthy, who will be chairing tonight's event, as he did so well last year. And so without further ado... And on that welcome, and without further ado, Krishnan, over to you, please.
Thank you very much indeed. Well, good evening. It's great fun to be back here for a second year. Last year was really packed and informal, and there were loads of really great questions. Just like, I don't know, was anyone here last year? Yes, a few of you. Okay, good. Well, just like last year, tonight is completely unstructured and unformatted. The only rule I would say is that if we're talking about one subject, don't change the subject. So if I say who would like to come in here and add something, keep it on the topic that we're talking about. And then when we've had enough of that, I'll move us on to the next topic, and somebody else can stick up their hand and change the subject. It's entirely up to you what we talk about tonight. You might want to talk about what's in the news right now, or something that hasn't been in the news at all. First of all, a big thank you for organising the event to the Hansard Society. What we are saying tonight is being recorded. It's all on the record. So do be aware, in the current environment that we're in, you'll have all read about everything that's going on Twitter and all the rest of it. You are responsible for what you say tonight. This is not a closed-door meeting. If you're on Twitter in the room, some of the tweets will be displayed on the wall, and the hashtag is YPQT2012. If you want to use that, I will be consulting my phone from time to time. If you're too shy to stand up and say something, I might read out your tweet. And it is also being streamed on the internet. This is also part of Parliament Week, which is trying very hard to engage young people in politics and in parliamentary democracy, which so soon after one of the worst attended elections in British democratic history is really, really important. There is a survey on your seat, and it would be great if you could fill that in. So, on the panel tonight, probably people you will know from the telly and the media in general. On my left, your right, Tanni Grey-Thompson, Baroness Tanni Grey-Thompson, who of course one of our most successful Paralympic athletes ever, and was the most... Are you still the most successful? No, you're...
No.
Okay, well, you were the most successful up until this year. Competed in 5 Paralympic Games, 16 medals, 11 of them gold, and over 30 world records. She now sits in the House of Lords as a crossbench peer. She's been very active on the recent welfare reform changes and all sorts of other issues to do with transport and access for disabled people on public transport and all sorts of things like that. But you can ask her about anything you like. There's an empty chair next to Tanni. That's because Simon Hughes is going to join us at some point in time. He's the Deputy Leader of the Liberal Democrats. Slightly confusing because although he is a very senior Liberal Democrat, he's not part of the government and is often quite critical of what the government is doing. So don't think because he's a Liberal Democrat he's part of the coalition necessarily. Next to me, Adam Afriyie, who's a Conservative. Adam was elected in 2005, the first black Conservative member of Parliament. He serves the constituency of Windsor South East. He is chairman, very topically tonight, because there's a Channel 4 programme about MPs' expenses, of the Committee on Members' Expenses. You may have seen some of that in the news today. Strong supporter of business, staunch Eurosceptic, and we will discover some of his other views during the course of the night. And next to Adam, Roshanara Ali, who is a Labour MP, a pretty new Member of Parliament from the 2010 intake. She won her seat with a 14% swing in Bethnal Green and Bow, displacing the Respect MP George Galloway in the process. She's got a big background in policy and think tankery. She was born in Bangladesh but was raised in Tower Hamlets, so she's very much a local person for her constituency. And again, you can ask our panel anything you like about where they're coming from. Now, I've got a list of questions that I can use if things dry up or if I need to kick things off, but I'm going to try not to use it. And what I'm going to do is just say, who would like to ask a question? Put your hand up and I'll bring you in. Please do not be shy. Yes, right here. Wait for the microphone to come to you and then tell us your name and where you're from. Okay?
Yeah. Hi, my name's Julian. I'm from, I don't really know, London. And I met the Education Secretary a couple of months ago, and I shared with him that I learned how to read a 300-page book in half an hour and memorise books, speeches, poems, quotes, the answers to tests, and how to learn languages in a flash. And I never used to be able to do these things. In fact, I struggled with reading. I struggled with memorising things when I was at school. I never really did that well at school. But then I went and did a private course off my own back and discovered that our minds are amazing. We're far more capable than they ever taught us at school. So I'm wondering, how could we get some of these sorts of advanced and accelerated learning skills that every human is capable of learning included into the national curriculum? How would that be possible? What are the steps we'd have to do in order to make that happen?
Okay, thank you. Adam?
Well, as former Shadow Minister for Science and Innovation, I'm very keen on any approach that works when it comes to education and learning. And I think if we look around this room, there are, 70 million people in the UK, 7 billion people on the planet, and there are very few identical twins. Every single person here is unique in the way that they learn, in the way that they get reward from education. So I think that anything that I believe in classrooms without walls. If there's anything, whether it's an app on your iPhone or whether it's a technique for learning if you're dyslexic, anything that enhances that learning experience and adapts to your personal learning style, I think is really important that the education system recognises that. And I certainly hope that with the reforms that Michael Gove is trying to bring through, he is recognising that outside the core subjects, that people should be more free to choose the kind of subjects that they would enjoy and that they would choose to do, rather than having the whole system laid upon them from the state, if you like.
Roshnara, I suppose at the heart of this question is how flexible education should be in Britain. Do you think teachers and schools need to embrace more alternative learning methods and systems?
I think that the school environment needs radical reform. And when my party was in power, we started some of that through introducing specialist status for schools so that they can focus on the arts or technology and so on through academies, but through other ways as well. I think the most important thing is that teachers have the autonomy to be creative, to encourage young people to learn in different ways, recognising the diversity of the way we think. I also think the role of technology is absolutely crucial. The classroom is still very different from the rest of society and the rapid change in society. And I actually think that the reforms that Michael Gove's introducing take us back to sort of the chalks and boards environment of the 50s and a different era, and the world has moved on. Young people need to be engaged in a way that recognises that they have very dynamic ways of learning that are very different from, for instance, when I went to school. We also need to make sure that there's much more room for creativity, for the arts. I think the current government is actually making a mistake in not allowing for that sort of flexibility in the education system, so that people can be, their where different ways of learning can be recognised. Just one thing, which is one of the things that I was involved with, where I worked before getting elected, is developing a new model of schools called the studio schools, which is basically trying to make sure the workplace and workplace ethos is much more integral to education, so that it's not that when you're in school you have one form of learning and then when you go into the world of work you get a complete shock because the school place is not adequately preparing you for that. So we need to do some of those things as well.
Okay, thank you. You'll notice that Simon Hughes has joined us. Hello, Simon. And as I said to you before, Simon is the Deputy Leader of the Liberal Democrats. You've joined us just on the first question. The gentleman down here asked it, which was about embracing more alternative or different learning methods. He's tried an accelerated learning technique himself. And said it was very successful. I was wondering if we should embrace more of those sorts of things in our schools. So while you tune in, Tanny.
Thank you. I think our education system is quite staid, actually. I've got a 10-year-old who's in year 6, And I suppose it's changed a lot from when I was her age, and I kind of really worry about some of the things that she's learning in school, in that we're trying to put lots of children into boxes and teach them all the same thing. We test the life out of them. I do actually believe in inspecting schools, but I think we inspect the life out of our schools. So, you know, teachers are educating our children to get through inspections, and we're not measuring what children learn and what their outcomes are. And I don't think we're doing enough of looking at children as individuals to see where their strengths and weaknesses are. And my dad always used to say to me, you know, education gives you choices. And I don't know, when I was about 14, I used to think, oh, God, here we go again. And actually, I then kind of accepted that my dad's right. But I don't think that we're doing things in the most positive way. And I think one of the downsides of what we do, if there are any prizes for consultations, focus groups, having more consultations, writing various drafts of statements and policy, and then reviewing it all, I think sometimes we just get too caught up in that. And I kind of really worry as well, there's not enough cross-curriculum work, that, you know, things like linking PE to education, you just look at the number of young people who are leaving school, you know, there's less and less people taking science degrees, and that's a massive cause of concern for me for our future economy, that if we're not getting the same number of, you know, the right number of people doing maths and sciences. My husband's an industrial chemist and he sees it in his work. There's less young people coming through, and actually the quality of their degrees in education is worse than it was 10 years ago. So I think we actually need a radical overhaul to actually compete with other countries around the world who've just got a much better system than we have.
Simon, do you think our education system at school level is flexible enough, embraces enough different methods of teaching?
Chris, thank you very much. Thank you all very much for coming. The answer is it can, but it normally doesn't, is my honest judgment. I chair a governance of a primary school just over Tower Bridge on the other side, which is 440 youngsters. And every half term, they decide what the subject is that will determine all the issues they're taught. So, for example, if they decided that it was going to be the Olympics, then for the half term, everything will be taught through the medium of discussing the Olympics. So maths and literacy and numeracy and science and everything else. But they decide, and the different classes decide. And the theory is that if youngsters are really keen to do something, they'll be much more motivated than being told what to do. So if they decide it's the Arctic, or climate change, or football, or computers, or cheap shows, or whatever it might be, they decide. Now, our head has the flexibility to do that. She still has to make sure they get their SATs exams and all the other stuff, but it seems to be very good. We are one of the most successful value-added schools in the country, so it appears to work as a technique. My two principles in these things, for sure, one is that education has to be interesting. You have to, above all, excite the young person, and that's why I've always believed that in secondary school, from 14, we should start letting young people, you lot, decide what the things are that you are really interested in, provided you have the basics in everything, basic numeracy, basic IT, basic literacy, basic maths, then, to be honest, you should go where your inspiration leads you. And the last thing is, we do need to look at different techniques if they're proven to work, but we've got to make sure they are not leading you down the wrong road. At the end of the day, you do have to, in life, be able to take exams of a sort. Sometimes you have to be able to do interviews. You have to psych yourself up to be ready for jumping certain hurdles, as well as being able to sustain work and learn to do stuff on your own.
Does anybody in the room want to talk about this topic? Have you got a point to make? Yes, on the end there. There's a hand there.
Yeah, I have a 9-year-old son who goes to a primary school, and my point against education, don't you feel that the children of their age is pushed too much? Like, from his age to let's say a 14-year-old, the weight that they carry, like he's bringing home homework that a 14-year-old would bring home as well. Like, don't you feel that the pressure for younger children are pretty much similar to a secondary school work?
Thank you. Anyone else? Yes, down here.
I just wondered what they... I mean, I teach history at a school up in Bedford, and I'm surprised that in teaching history, in 13 years of teaching, the history syllabus has changed 7 times, and again it's going to change next year. My students here have just been told they can't take exams in January, so I was wondering, why do politicians keep wanting to mess up the system which, in some respects, we're doing quite well by ourselves. We don't need too much guidance, and I think if we're just left alone a little bit, we actually do quite a good job.
Okay, Adam, can you pick up those 2 points?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, look, ultimately what matters, and what matters in your school, what matters for your 9-year-old, is that actually when they get to exam time, that they achieve a good exam result, and that exam result is recognised not just for your child or for your pupils, but it's actually recognised around the world to be a decent grade and to be of a decent standard. And more than that, as an employer myself for many years, that actually employers will say, well, if the child got that grade, they must be up to it, they're reaching a certain standard. So I think standards are really important. The key reform that Michael Gove and the coalition government have brought in is that a lot of the schools are now becoming free schools and academies. Now, that sounds like a technicality, but it addresses your point about actually allowing teachers and allowing a head teacher to set the ethos of the school and to work their own curriculum, which they think works for their area and works for their pupils.
The academies are resourced by Labour.
Yeah.
No, absolutely. No, absolutely. And we wholeheartedly believe in them, and we want pretty much every school to be an academy, so they have that freedom to set the way in which the pupils work. Because I want good results.
Before we move on, I mean, Simon, there's a couple of people on Twitter, and I suspect in the room, who are inevitably asking about university tuition fees. Does anyone want to talk about this specifically from the room? Yeah, okay. There's on the right hand side, the hand up there.
Hi. The lady down there was talking about her 9-year-old son. My 10-year-old brother, he's going into secondary school, and he's just had to do a test, the 11-year plus. He's having to do an algebra test, which they haven't learned, which they're going to be learning in secondary. I'm just wondering, why is he learning stuff when they haven't even taught it at his age yet?
Okay.
We're having to force knowledge into him.
It's a good one for his school. Anyone on tuition fees before we move on? Otherwise, I'll just read out one of these next to us. Are you both asking about tuition fees? Yeah. Okay. Gentleman in front of you.
Why are we making cutbacks when we can just collect taxes off of big corporation companies like Starbucks?
You're changing the subject.
No, I mean...
I'm very happy to ask that question, but I asked specifically, is it about tuition fees? And you said yes. So you didn't tell the truth.
It's a good question.
I will come back to you in a minute. I'll come back to you next. But let me just read out these because I've raised the topic, so I think we need to address it. Which is, why are you raising tuition fees to £9,000? How am I paying £9,000 for university when Simon Hughes' watch probably cost the same? Someone says. Now that was from Benny. Is Benny in the room?
He's tweeting lots tonight.
Yeah, okay, fine. Simon, just take on the tuition fees question.
Well, firstly, thank you very much. I should think my watch is worth 10 quid, I should think. It's a Seconda. Somebody might tell me it's worth 15 quid, but no, listen. I didn't vote for the increase in tuition fees. It was a controversial issue, and Liberal Democrat policy is still to get rid of them. But we didn't win the election on our own. We won in a parliament where no party won. Labour had introduced tuition fees. They said they wouldn't, but they did. They then put them up when they said they wouldn't. The Tories were more comfortable about tuition fees. In the real world, we could not win our argument. So we had to negotiate a coalition deal. The Labour Party had set up a review by a man called Lord Brown. He reviewed unlimited tuition fees. The two parties negotiated, and they decided in the end that there would have to be an upper limit of 9,000. But the really important thing is that nobody has to pay before you go. Nobody pays when you're at university. You only start paying if you earn 21 grand a year. You never pay in any year when you earn under that. You never pay in any year when you're off sick. You never pay in any year when you take time off to look after kids or look after your family. And after 30 years, you stop paying. And you pay more as you earn more. So effectively, it's a graduate contribution. And can I tell you my honest private view? I've never talked to Adam about it or other colleagues on the panel. I think had the government followed my little idea that I gave them, which is to say, abolish the tuition fee system and replace it by something called graduate contribution, there would have been no huge row about it. Because actually, everybody understands that if you earn 100 grand a year, it is reasonable you contribute to the 3 years or 4 years you're at university.
So a tax, I mean, after university?
The only reason, Christian, we couldn't call it a tax is, as you probably know, the UK tax system doesn't allow you to collect tax if you go overseas. So if you've got a job overseas, we couldn't collect the money, whereas the American tax system, by contrast, wherever you work in the world, collects your money. So that's why it couldn't be a tax system. It would have to be a contribution. It's a contract. I think that would have got us off the hook. We wouldn't have had riots, and people would have understood. But unfortunately, we couldn't quite persuade all the necessary people.
Tanny, where are you on this? There's a question up there on the Twitter wall which says, if all the politicians went to uni for free, why must the youth of today pay £9,000 per year?
Yeah, I voted against. I voted against tuition fees every time it came to us for a couple of reasons. One, that I didn't quite understand why it was 9,000. Not necessarily that I felt it should have been more. I've got a friend who's doing. She's in med school in Harvard, and she'll leave with about $450,000 worth of debt. But with a Harvard medical degree, she knows that she'll be able to pay that back. I think for me, the real worry was, and I went through university, I didn't pay fees, I didn't get a living allowance because my dad was an architect and he paid that and he could afford to. But my husband would never have gone to university unless there was a grant. He did a degree, he did a PhD, he now pays quite a lot back in tax. And for me, I think that's a much more sustainable way of doing it. I think I don't object to students paying some money, because I think you should think very clearly about whether you want to go to university and the value of your degree. And actually, I suppose this is where I do feel a bit old and grumpy. I think there's now a huge number of young people doing degrees that doesn't necessarily lead to a job afterwards. And I've got a real worry that you do a degree because it's nice and it's fun, and doing a degree in football. I'm not sure that will get you a job. If that's how you want to spend your money, then that's up to you. But I just don't think the right people will be going to university if we set up that limit.
Roshanara, one of the questions we got sent in advance was about this as well. Alex O'Dell asked, will you reduce university fees if you're elected in 2015?
Well, what we proposed was to introduce a graduate tax system, which it would have been nice if Simon did come across and join us in support of that. But when we were in power, we expanded higher education, and we recognised that you needed to find a way to pay for that if you want to reach the 50% that we set. So our policy is to have a graduate tax because it's much fairer. And the second thing...
So introducing fees was a mistake?
Introducing fees to that level was a mistake.
But was introducing fees to £3,000 a mistake?
Well, we had a difficult balancing act, which was if you want to expand higher education, as we did, to a record level, then you have to find a way of paying for it. And at the time, the public was not prepared to pay it through income tax, and that is a dilemma for all parties. So we believe that as a party, graduate tax would be a fairer way. Can I just add one point, which is Simon's given his rationale for why the coalition government's decided to do what it has. What is utterly scandalous is scrapping the education maintenance allowance and reducing it to the level where it means people from lower income backgrounds, like many in my constituency, who stay on in education because of this education maintenance grant are now finding it incredibly difficult. And that is a ladder to higher education and further education in order to get the skills that they need. And that is just not acceptable.
Are there any people, just on that, are there any people affected by EMA in the room? Yeah? The hand went up there. Can I just get your take on that?
Hi, I'm Lidan, I'm from Harrow. The government suggested a criteria of free school meals, and this criteria is excluding children from low-income backgrounds where their parents work because of the working tax credit sort of thing on the free school meals. And students who want to gain an education are facing financial difficulties in my constituency and around the country are unable to because of a silly government criteria where they didn't think it out properly. And I'm wondering, what is the government going to do about it?
Okay, Adam. Now remember, Adam isn't in the government, he's a Conservative, but he's not a Conservative minister.
Yeah. Can I hit the tuition fees question head
on?
Okay. Ask yourself the question. Who benefits from a university degree? It's the person who gets the degree, and there's also a partial benefit for society overall, because hopefully everyone will be a lot more civilised, a lot more educated, and contribute to the workforce. So the question is not whether or not the person who chooses to go to university should pay anything. It's a question of what proportion should be borne by the state because of the benefits overall, and what proportion should be borne by you for choosing to go to university and trying to seek a better life. And I have to say that the evidence is pretty clear. Is for those who go to university, the outcomes so far have been pretty positive in terms of their earnings potential, and it certainly with the scheme that we brought in, it certainly works out cost effective to do so. But the most important thing about this for me, it's about choice. It's about you deciding which course you're going to study, and then looking at the job market, if that's what you're interested in, and deciding whether or not it's worth your while paying those tuition fees. I think it's really important that you make that choice so that universities are held to account. If they've got a course that doesn't produce jobs, or it's not the kind of course that you would wish to spend your money on, they will need to adjust that course in order to attract your business. I think that's a really good model, and the question mark is what proportion does the individual bear versus the state. But I think it's a good system, and I wholeheartedly embrace both the tuition. I recognise the constraints about having a tax afterwards, but I fully embrace the tuition fee model. In terms of EMA, I agree there is a bit of a bump on some technicalities for. It's not a vast number of people, for a small handful of people. The idea was not.
They tend to be the most vulnerable, though.
Not 5% of the funding.
Not necessarily the most vulnerable. The criteria is the free school meals. By way of background, the education maintenance allowance was largely going to middle-class households who could afford to go to school in any case. What's happened now is actually more money has been allocated. More money has been allocated to this bursary scheme, which is directly targeted at those households who genuinely need the money, the free school meal households. And we certainly will be, or the government certainly will be dealing with those. The one or two technicalities you're talking about, where it's creating a bit of pressure at the moment. But nobody who is on the EMA is going to lose it. It's only new people who may be getting it in the future. Okay,
right at the back, you've been trying to get in. I don't know whether you're going to change the subject or not, but go on. Okay, go on. Is your microphone on? We can't really hear you.
Now?
Yeah, okay.
Sorry about that. I was staying on the tuition fees, and I understand that it would make sense for people to have to pay for a course that's going to benefit them. But don't you think that it's all about social mobility? Because really it's going to be the society that benefits from those who are getting the higher income jobs. And also I just wanted to make a point to the Liberal Democrat. I understand that you... Sorry, my memory's a bit phasey today. I understand that the coalition would be an excuse to not... Sorry. I understand that the coalition would be an excuse to not cut to up the tuition fees, but I think it's really outrageous that the Lib Dems could go against something that they were so strong about before, and you could see pictures of Nick Clegg and whatnot going for. Oh, sorry, I'm messing this up completely.
I think we get the point you're making. Simon, just address that quickly. I mean, of course, Nick Clegg apologised about this earlier this year.
Yeah, look.
Did he apologise for making the pledge, or did he apologise for breaking it?
We had an election commitment to get rid of tuition fees, and we made a promise personally that we wouldn't vote for an increase. And when in this Parliament, and when it came to it, the deal that the coalition had made after the election said that if we, Liberal Democrat MPs, didn't agree with the deal that was made, we could abstain, and a lot of us did. The answer is he didn't apologise for the policy, because we made the right policy, we made a party policy democratically to get it. He apologised for the implication that we could deliver it, for making a promise to do something which in the end was undeliverable, because there weren't enough of us there to see it through. Now, we've learnt the lesson, which is that we have to be careful, and other parties have to be careful, that people understand that if you don't have a majority, you can't deliver everything you want. And we have to make that clear to you good people and to everybody else.
Okay, fine. I'm going to move us on to our... Which one is funny? I can't even see it.
There's plenty of giggling, so I'm curious. What's from the...
I can't remember the Oh, I see. Even Pudsey looks suspicious, yeah. Very funny. let me just remind you, it's public. Whatever goes on there is also on Twitter, so be careful what you're going to tweet. Now, our gentleman there had a question about tax. Let's change the subject. The guy we heard from before. Let's hear your question again. No, the guy behind you. The guy who asked the question who I told off for changing the subject. It was about big corporations, wasn't it?
Yeah. Why do we need to cut when we can collect? As we're losing a lot of money through taxes from corporations such as Starbucks and Amazon, and the French have started to collect tax from Amazon. They've made roughly 2 million from it.
Okay, thank you. Now, for those of you who aren't across this, 3 big international companies, Amazon, Google and Starbucks, were called into Parliament a few days ago and grilled by a committee of MPs and were told, we're not accusing you of breaking the law on tax, we're accusing you of being immoral. And so the question is, should you crack down on the system or on those companies? Should you change the law in some way? Tanny Gray-Thompson, one of the other things that people have talked about on this is whether to boycott some of these big businesses. Would you think about doing that as well?
I think generally, I think the companies should be paying tax. I know there'll be an argument depending what side of the fence you're on about what the companies bring to the UK and the jobs and all that, but my kind of view is that, you know, if you earn the money, you pay tax on it, whether that's as a company that has a base or has operations in the UK, or whether you're a high net worth individual. And, you know, one of my concerns is we also have a number of very high net worth individuals that, you know, are living in the UK who are more likely, you know, to be able to have the right accountants to avoid paying tax.
But you wouldn't stop using Google or going to Starbucks because of this?
It does affect how I think about those companies, because there's a whole debate about what's within the rules, and then there's the debate which, you know, is about what's morally right, and I think it's morally right that you pay the tax. And, you know, I don't think it sends out a great message to anyone else in society, whether that's paying your tax or whether it's, you know, cheating benefits. If some people are seen to be allowed to get away with it, then I think that affects an awful lot of other things in society, which I think takes us down the wrong path. So what I'd want to see is I want to see these companies paying tax.
Rushnara, isn't it really a Labour system that has allowed this to come about?
No, I think
you know, Ed Balls and Gordon Brown have got to take their responsibility on this, haven't they?
Absolutely not. What I would say is that there is a need for international work between governments to make sure that tax loopholes are closed. It's not
which
just,
never ever happens.
Well, it needs.
That's always a reason for doing nothing.
No. I agree with you that domestically we need to take a stand. I think we have to look at our own laws to make sure we close the tax loopholes. Secondly, I think the pressure that the public can exert is very important. Consumer pressure is very important. I don't support boycotts because at the end of the day there are people in those jobs that we need them to stay in those jobs. If these businesses go out of business, that's not good for our economy. But we need to make sure that we exert the maximum consumer pressure and moral pressure and media pressure on these companies so that they do actually
but the
pay
maximum
right
consumer pressure is a boycott. And you're saying you don't support boycotts?
I think there's a whole series of other steps. If every person in this room today started to join a campaign to put pressure on these companies, and millions of people did that, then they would have to pay attention.
But what do you want them to do? Isn't it the system that is at fault? They're not breaking the law.
We need to improve the system, and we need to make sure that there's public pressure to do.
But what do you want the companies to do? To voluntarily pay tax, to which they don't have to?
That's right. But I'm saying we need to do two things. We need to improve close the tax loopholes, and make sure we do what we can within our own system to address that, as well as get international agreement. I don't think we can say we should let the international community do their own thing. They should come together. Okay. And there is more discussion and attempts to do so, and we need to make the most of that opportunity. I think the government needs to do more than just talk about it. They are responsible for this right now.
Adam,
just blaming the previous government is frankly not enough.
Adam, do you agree that these companies are acting immorally?
No, I don't. I think politicians, governments are acting immorally by pretending that by obeying the law in the way you declare your tax, somehow that's morally reprehensible. The challenge is that politicians need to step up to the plate and simplify the systems of paying taxation, and yes, close the loopholes. And it's not just the Labour government or the Conservative government or the coalition government, it's all governments who've made these systems so complicated that there are so many different ways of getting out of paying tax legally and lawfully. So I'm not in favour of any form of tax evasion, that would be illegal, but I am in favour of you and your parents and every business, small and large, actually trying to pay the lowest level of tax possible. That's what makes the country run. Businesses are the engine of the economy, and every single time that a business makes a massive profit, I would like everybody to cheer, because you know that the tax burden for the rest of us has just gone down, that ticked down another little notch. So I think.
But when you say close the loopholes, what loophole? Because the suggestion is, from some people, that businesses should be taxed on their revenue, which if you applied that to Google and Starbucks, would result in massive tax bills for them.
Well, it's a lovely idea, but the tax system as it works at the moment, pretty much in every country in the world, is that the profit that's made, which would normally go into shareholders' pockets and into pension funds that your parents have for their pensions, that is what's taxed. So I think I'm comfortable with that principle.
So you're comfortable with them sending money off to Bermuda and Switzerland to minimise their tax? Because that's what they do, isn't it?
Oh, not in the slightest. But the thing is, but I'm not angry with those companies. If your
no, but you want the loophole closed. Is what I'm saying. Unilaterally, Britain should close those loopholes.
No, I want the loophole. They would need to be on an international stage.
Okay.
But
then nothing will happen.
Well, no, it can happen very quickly. My personal aim is that we have a simple, lower, flatter tax system. So actually these loopholes disappear in the United Kingdom. So if, for example, one had a simple tax rate, 20% across the board, then it wouldn't matter how you declared your profits or your personal income, it would still be the same. There would be no temptation to move those declarations anywhere else, and people would therefore not wish to find any loopholes, and there wouldn't be any anyway.
Simon, there's a challenge up on the wall after the Labour and Conservative MPs basically said the same thing, as far as I can tell. Why do all politicians sound the same? Where's the difference?
I can see that, and even without the challenge, I was going to say that I fundamentally disagree with Adam, and I think I disagree with Rushnara too. But I've been here when there was a Tory government and Labour government. Both have been dreadful at dealing with inequality in Britain. Yeah? I expected the Tories to be dreadful because they generally believe in the marketplace and letting the wealthier and the richer become more big and more powerful. Generally. I thought Labour might not do that, but at the end of Labour being in power under Blair and Brown, the gap between the rich and the poor had widened, and the city was having ridiculously high salaries and bonuses for some, while the people at the bottom were struggling. Yeah? So, I'm very clear, we need to have a much fairer tax system. I didn't want the top rate of tax to be dropped because I think that people who earn huge amounts of money should pay more on their higher earnings. Secondly, we have a scandalous position. It's not just Starbucks and other people. Look at, when you go home, look at the profits of your water company, which is a monopoly in your area. You can't buy your water from anybody else. I've been doing a study of the water companies. Thames is the biggest. Huge profits, no tax, pretty well. Why? Because either they set up strange arrangements where they're paying money to their shareholders in dividends, yeah, or they are paying back debt which they have agreed with their shareholders or their companies, or they're using offshore companies in the Cayman Islands or in the British Virgin Islands or Bermuda. Look at all the companies which have contracts with government. So I've gone to government and said, look, this is a scandal that must end. I want you to look at every company that does work with government. And my view, the answer is everybody in the country, people, individuals, and companies should pay a minimum of their profit in tax. They shouldn't be allowed to be clever with it, use accountants to avoid it. And for me, it's about 20 or 25%. Because only that way will people have proper corporate social responsibility. We have a more unfair country than any time in the 20s. And I have to tell you, I think some people are doing very nicely, thank you, whilst the other people are struggling and paying their dues. It's completely not.
Okay, briefly, Rushnara.
I just want to remind Simon that his party is in power. He might not be, but the business secretary is Vince Cable, and if he is serious about inequality and social mobility, which is actually getting worse right now, and social mobility is at its worst, then his party should do something about it.
We are
Because
doing
it
things
sounds
about
very sanctimonious.
We are doing
actually.
things about it.
So do something about
We're
it.
making sure that shareholders have votes over the pay of executives for the first time, so that executives can't award themselves 100% increases when the workers get no increase.
Okay, who wants to come in on tax on this question without changing the subject? Without changing the subject, I'm saying, yes? Gentleman there with his hand up. Blue shirt.
Hi, I'm Raphael from Maidenhead. I'd just like to ask, in the Liberal Democrat manifesto, they said that they'd impose a mansion tax on properties over 2 million. And why hasn't this policy been pursued?
There's a very simple answer, which is that the Tories don't agree with it. And it's a coalition government. Look, we believe that the reason for taxing properties with a mansion tax is you can't hide your house. Yeah? You can hide other assets, you can hide the money in your bank, you can send it to Switzerland, you cannot hide your house. And therefore, high-value houses are an easy way of collecting money. And if you can't afford it because you say, I'm very poor, although I have a house worth 2 million, because I don't have a big fine, then it can be deferred till you die and then it can be paid.
Adam, why are your party against is mansion tax? Is it because you've got lots of mansions? Or...
I mean, this is the image that this is the image that I think Labour and Lib Dems would always like to portray about the Conservatives. But the truth is that basically we are passionate about the least well-off in society. But the way that we see of giving people a chance in life is making sure there are jobs in the economy. And that means that two things. One, actually we do quite like the policy of raising the tax-free threshold at the bottom so that the least well-off get advantages from that. But the idea, look, just think about it for a moment. The biggest challenge we have in this country right now is there isn't enough cash being invested in British businesses. There's not enough cash coming through the banks. You've got to ask yourself the question, those people who have the money, those businesses who have the money, how do we get them to spend the money? And the answer is not by treating them like some kinds of, like villains, but it's actually by encouraging them and giving them confidence that a Lib Dem government and a Labour government aren't going to completely snaffle them or sequestrate their resources if they invest them in the British economy. If you want the billions in the economy, we've got to send the right signal to people who have the money to put it into businesses and to invest it in Britain so more jobs come about and its life is a lot better for the rest of us.
Okay, right at the back.
Hi, my name's Joseph and I'm from Yorkshire. And basically, I'm guessing that you know that if you break down democracy from Latin, it means people power, right? And I don't have any direct statistics, but I'm very aware that voter turnout is low. And when I say low, I mean like 30% low. So when the winner of that wins, then with the majority vote, they're only actually representing about 10% of the public. So how is that people power? And how are you representing the voice of the people if you don't know the majority of it?
Roshnara, you start this one.
Okay, well, I think you've got to start. Personally, I think you've got to start from an early age to make sure that young people have access to political education. We introduced citizenship education precisely to do that. That's being scrapped. I personally think that the voting age should be reduced to 16. Imagine how politicians would behave if they. So how many of you are 16 in this room? Anyone? Yeah. Quite a lot of you. At the moment, until you're 18, 16-year-olds don't have that voice. I think that would completely change the way we engage.
Why?
I also think.
Why do you think that would make a big difference to turnout? If people over 18 can't be bothered to go and vote,
how many of you?
Why would a load of people under?
Well, let's ask the audience.
But this is not a demographic audience.
Okay, fine. But
this is an audience of people who are interested in politics. That's why they're here.
Look, when I go to schools in my constituency, young people are passionate about the things that matter in their lives, and that is politics. And I think there's a big job for politicians and teachers to do in making sure that when we talk about politics, it's relevant to people's everyday lives. And I think that's a job for the media, that's a job for politicians, that's a job for wider society as well. The second thing is we need to, as we've seen this week with youth parliaments and Parliament Week and all these initiatives, we need to make sure young people have the chance to exercise power from a very early age. School councils, I set up a leadership program called Uprising. Please join if you want to. In order to get young people directly in politics, to become councillors, to become MPs. So we invest in the next generation. If we don't do that, then it's not surprising that people are going to be less enthusiastic and interested in politics. So we need to make sure power is handed to young people from an early age. School council is a good way to do that, but there are lots of other ways.
Do you want to come back?
Yeah, I would love to. First of all, you didn't answer my question. You just turned it around and tried to just, I don't know what you're doing.
Hang on. Right, go on.
What I was going to say is, most people, like most everyday people, don't know anything about politics. Like, if you ask someone who you voted for, they'll be like, I voted for David Cameron. No, you didn't. You voted for the Conservatives. And that's you not doing your job properly. So what I'm really trying to get is, why is this? Why do you honestly think that people don't know anything about politics? Why do you think that people don't care? Why is the turnout so low?
Why do you think it is?
I don't know. This is question time.
You don't know?
I'm answering it. No, obviously not.
Okay.
That's why I'm asking the question, isn't it?
Well, yeah, fair enough, but people often have a view themselves. Adam?
I'm a passionate believer in democracy. Basically, some of our forebears in this country died, millions of them actually died, fighting for democracy. Right now, there's an Arab, during the Arab Spring, people are literally setting themselves on fire, risking life and limb to try to get just a tiny little bit of what we have here. So let me just encourage everyone here, every young person, everyone in the country, just get out, have a think about it and get out and vote. It's not just about we politicians going around the schools as we do. I've been in 3 schools over the last couple of weeks talking to younger people about why they should be interested in politics. It's also for younger people, everyone in this room, to step forward. If you believe in something, then fight for it.
But what
Join
about
a
his
party
question about why have things got so bad? Is it the fault of this generation of politicians? Is it the fault of the expenses scandal? Or what is it? I mean,
I think there are two aspects. When I was in the US at the American Heritage Institute, they had a really interesting view of this. They said that if things aren't bad enough, turnout goes down. So clearly, people aren't enraged enough to get out and vote at the levels that we would like to see them. But in general,
but do you think that stands up when we're in the middle of one of the longest economic depressions, in a century?
Well, I think the evidence is.
I mean, if you say things aren't that bad, I mean, they are pretty bad, aren't they? I mean,
no, I'm saying it hasn't gone to the extent where people feel that the issues that matter to them, the politicians are doing such a dreadful job that they feel they have to get out and march and vote for a particular party. So basically, what I would say is it's a two-way street. Yes, we politicians have to try and be clearer and have to try to engage, but I'm sorry, you have a responsibility too, if you're concerned about something, to get involved and to vote. And if you don't vote, don't ever complain to me about what the government's doing.
Simon, I mean, isn't it actually that people don't think that different political parties make any difference?
Joseph, let me try and answer your question. I'll give you 5 reasons, yeah? I'm not pretending they're the perfect reasons, they're the only reasons. Yeah, 5 short reasons. 1, some people don't think they're qualified to judge, they don't think they know enough, yeah? Secondly, some people don't understand what the differences are and therefore don't know which choice to make. Thirdly, they don't think it will change anything. Why bother? Because I think tomorrow it'll be the same. 4th reason, people think that some people standing for election are in it for themselves, and therefore why go along with it? But I think the last reason, and you may know the answer to this better than me, is that we live in a society, and the X Factor and Strictly and all these things are evidence of that, where people have an instantaneous result from a vote. Yeah? You vote on a Friday or Saturday night or Sunday night, and you know the result that same night. And that doesn't happen in politics. You vote for a party, you vote for an individual, you vote for somebody to take over as the police commissioner, the result takes 5 years. And people think, hang on a minute, that's not what I want. I want an instantaneous result. So, given that we aren't going to get immediate change 2 seconds after the vote's cast, how can we deal with it? There are elections which are high turnout, often where they're close, where people think that result is uncertain, the turnout goes up. Where people really know who the candidates are and have met them and engaged with them, the turnout goes up. So we have to make sure that in Yorkshire, in your case, or in London, in my case, if I'm the MP here, We engage with the maximum number of voters and give them a good reason for voting. And if you do that, you won't have a perfect system, you won't have 100% turnout, people move, people change, people die, the electoral register is never complete, but you will get more people voting. But please, your ideas are as important as
I'll give you the last word in a moment, Tanya, but let's just get a couple of thoughts from people in the audience. Now, I don't want questions, I just want thoughts on this topic as to why people aren't voting. Yes, in the front row here.
Yeah.
Tom Robson from Bedford Modern School. Surely if we have such poor turnouts and people aren't that interested in politics, surely we should just make voting compulsory. Yeah. Surely that would increase turnout.
Thank you. I'll leave that in the air for now. Right at the back, halfway in. Yeah.
I don't, help me out, Power, I'm from Anglo-European School. I don't agree with the fact that you said it's not all about politicians. Well, actually, how are you meant to vote on something that you don't understand? Like, for the example, the police commissioner's turnout was terrible, it was 15%. Well, the information was let out late. Oh, yes, it was on the internet, but not everybody in the UK can access the internet. And also, there was hardly any choice anyway, but the point is that if the format of the way it was set out as well was quite hard for the majority of people to understand. You give out these turnouts, you give out these referendums, but the way they're worded is actually quite difficult. And if you're not in, for some people, they find it difficult. And I think the way politics is represented now, it's not pushed enough. And citizenship in schools it's not shown as an important, it's usually mixed into another lesson, but I know in my school citizenship is it's completely on a different timetable, like it's its own lesson.
Okay, thank you. And right at the back, in the back room there, lady with blonde curly hair had her hand up. Do you still want to come back in? No, right at the back. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Isabel. I just wanted to agree with what's just been said about citizenship. I'm Danish and I was raised in Spain, and in both those countries you have lessons on citizenship, what it means to be a member of society and what your obligations are in school. And that means that we are aware of how to participate in a democracy and that we have to participate. And if you don't have that, and I find that in England, when I speak to English people, when I speak to my friends, they simply don't know. And they say, well, where should I have found out? Who should have told me? And they don't feel any obligation to go out, and they don't know how to interact. They don't know what to do. And I think that it's very important to try and change that. But I do feel that perhaps politicians find it very convenient to have a small turnout, because the smaller the electorate, the smaller the number of people that you have to control, or whose minds you have to change, or who you have to convince.
Okay, I'll come back to some of the hands that are up in a moment, but I want to hear from Tanya Gray-Thompson first.
Thank you. I think I'm in a really privileged position actually in Parliament, because I'm a crossbencher, so I'm not a member of a party. I've never been a member of a party, partly because I can't figure out what party to join. And depending what the issue is on, I kind of differ quite a lot on what I think about things. But I think this sort of, it is very worrying. The lack of engagement, I think, is getting worse. And I don't think it's a recent phenomenon. I think it actually goes back to probably my generation. I'm 43. So I think if you've got parents who aren't particularly engaged in politics, then your children aren't going to be particularly engaged in politics. And I think there's a whole pile of things that turn people off. I think it's the political soundbite. I was in a school last week, a couple of weeks ago, and I was asked, so when you do an interview, are you told how long the soundbite has to be? And that was from a 16-year-old, and I thought that actually was quite a cynical comment from a 16-year-old, that, we're actually being told how long we're meant to speak for. I think it's harder to tell the difference between some of the parties and some of the people, because I think a lot of politicians these days are told what they're meant to think. And I've been on Question Time and I've been on many questions, and you see the party politicians alternate with the lines that they're allowed to use, and I struggle a little bit with that, because it'd be lovely if they could just say what they think, what they personally think. I see less of that. I do think things like the expenses scandal has seriously affected a lot of people's view of politicians. There are some amazing politicians that work in this place, but everyone gets lumped into the worst case scenario. And I don't think somebody raised citizenship. I was in a school last year and I was talking to a group of young girls about citizenship. They didn't even realise they were being taught citizenship And that's really worrying. And it's all the stuff it's saying about how to vote, where to vote, when to vote. It's terrifying that there were probably more votes for X Factor than there was for the PCC. And when I went to my local polling booth, I kind of sat there, asking people, about why they were voting, and because there was basically nobody there. There were people turning up saying they couldn't get the information. There are 8 million people in this country who don't have access to the internet. And I think it's a cop-out saying, well, you can only find the information on the internet. Well, somebody I spoke to went to the local police station to say, you must have leaflets on the candidates, and they were told they weren't allowed to discuss it because they might get fired.
What about just to sort of turn it on you for a moment. You're unelected.
Yeah.
And you are a politician.
Yeah.
Why should you get a say in anything to do with our lives?
Because that's the way the system is at the minute. And,
do you think it's a good idea?
I don't think... Generally, I think the House of Lords does a reasonably good job of being able to take a long-term view, because actually we get more rebellions in the House of Lords, you get far more people being able to say what they think, because we're not having to fight to be re-elected. I don't agree that we should be there for life. We have some amazing people in the House of Lords, but I think, probably a 15-year term is probably about enough before you need to go off and do something else. The average age is coming down in the House of Lords, probably not as much as it should do. We're not terribly diverse. We do okay for women, but that's about it. And, I think we could do better. But it's interesting, the whole debate about House of Lords reform. I think the House of Commons needs reform as much as the House of Lords does.
Okay.
It's not just one, it's got to be both.
I'm going to go back for a few thoughts from the audience, and then we'll have time for one last question to go around the panel. So start here.
Is one of the reasons why people don't vote because they see that there's not much change, because politicians seem all the same and things? Is one of the reasons because of the electoral systems we use, first past the post, etc.? People feel that you think
single transferable vote would really get people going a bit?
Well,
yeah.
I don't know.
I can see that.
It's just I don't know. That it never seems to be any change. Maybe is that due to the electoral systems we use?
Thank you. Could you just pass the microphone behind you? Let's hear from you now. And then over on this side.
In response to what you just said, I don't think anyone even understands first past the post, so I don't think that's And I think that we should bring in citizenship compulsory and politics, because I started studying politics last year and there were so many things I didn't even know, and I feel like if I hadn't studied politics, probably wouldn't care, just because I haven't been exposed to it. So could the government try and encourage young people, because we're not going to vote otherwise?
Thank you. Yeah, now over this side, there are a couple of hands up. Let's get...
My thing is about how you said about changing it to 16. Well, most teenagers wouldn't vote because they'd see it as teenagers in modern day are demonized, as in they're seen as just being hoodies and stuff. So they think if the government judges you in such a way, why should you get involved? If it's not to them, it might seem like it's not going to change in any way, it won't improve. And then also, a lot of the government and different parties, all their policies seemed way too alike. And you wonder yourself, what's the difference between each one? You can't really define it because they're...
Thank you. Now at the back, you've had your hand up for a long time, right on the end there. Right back row on the end. Yeah.
I just want to give reference to the American campaigning system, where at least $4 billion was invested in the campaign elections for Obama and Mitt Romney. I think his was $790 million. I understand that geographically these places are massive compared to the United Kingdom, but then again I also understand that when someone's campaigning here, there are limitations onto how many times they can advertise on the BBC, for example, or how much they can invest on their campaigns. Why is that? By limiting the amount they're allowed to spend and invest on maintaining this place where we're going to get them into a leadership position to take control of us. Why can't they invest more and have...
So you'd like it to be a lot more like America, where you can just advertise on telly and...
I just want them to be able to... No, that's not true. Because it's the electorate that gives these people the donations to do what they need to do. But it's about investing in explaining your points of view, educating the people as to why you're going to do this and what actions you're going to take. Because everyone in this room right now is saying that they have voters' apathy because they don't understand what the policies are. If you invest more money into explaining what these policies are and how the changes are going to be made, obviously they're going to be able to see more vividly.
Okay, thank you. Right, we have a few minutes left. We've got time to change the subject and ask one other question. So who's got, on the end there, at the back, you've had your hand up for a while.
All right, I'm Kareem from Croydon. Just wanted to raise the issue around youth unemployment. Obviously, the figures are too high right now, and I keep hearing the phrase you're talking about the system. The system is something that you're trying to keep us all stuck in, and it ain't working. Like, there's too many things implemented that don't relate to us, and obviously we're the generation of now, you were the generation of yesterday, and you're doing things to still benefit yourselves and your grandparents. But we're trying to grow up and be successors of what you're doing, but there's no way for us to progress.
Yep.
And if there's work out there that are going to older people, but you're still complaining that young people's unemployment is low, then I don't see the point in you even opening your mouths about it.
Okay, thank you. Tammy.
Oh. No. Do you know what? I don't actually know the answer. I wish I did. You know, I'm not an economist. I find it really worrying that actually, if you look at these unemployment figures, there's a whole generation of young people growing up feeling, what's the point of bothering? And that, I think, has a big effect on the involvement in democracy and voting and engagement and all sorts of things. I wish I had an answer how to kickstart the economy. I think some of it comes back to education. I don't actually know the answer. There you go. Sorry. I'm not sure I can give a better one even if you give me more time.
Roshnara.
Well, I completely sympathise with what you're saying. I have very high unemployment, youth unemployment in my constituency. We have the highest number of concentration of young people in Europe in my constituency. And what I think is a big mistake on the part of this government is taking the emphasis away from tackling youth unemployment and at the same time actually giving tax breaks to millionaires. Those are the wrong priorities. We need to invest in the next generation. You're absolutely right. And the first thing to do is make sure that the government expands apprenticeships. They talk a lot about that, but I know that for every one apprenticeship program scheme, you've got 7, 8, 9, 10 people chasing it, and we can deal with that immediately. The government can just expand that, but it's wrong right now to give tax breaks to millionaires. That's the wrong priority. That's one thing they could do. The second thing is that they could tax bankers' bonuses so that you could invest that money into creating more job opportunities, more training and apprenticeship programs for young people. So the policies need to be targeted to exactly the points you're raising, and that's not happening right now. That's what we would do if we were in power.
Adam.
I think the most important thing is that actually in Britain we have thriving businesses. The only place your job is coming from, the only place anyone's job is coming from is British businesses if they're thriving. So any measures that clamp down on British businesses and stop them expanding and investing or being terrified of having all their money taken away by a Labour government, that's not a good position for British businesses to be in. The more confident they feel about creating jobs, then the more likely it is that youth unemployment will go down. Two other aspects to that. Number one is that generally younger people are on lower salaries, and I think it's really important that we raise that tax-free threshold, because if you can earn your money without being taxed at the lower level, certainly if you're from a disadvantaged background, that's incredibly helpful. I think the second thing is that, again, with the benefits system, is at the moment some young people who are on benefits, it kind of makes sense to stay on benefits financially if you can't get a very high-paying job. So again, I think that needs to be tackled. Tax-free threshold, benefits that really encourage people to go to work. But above all, we have got to be relaxed and got to be encouraging British enterprises, especially small businesses, to actually invest the money that's sitting in their bank accounts.
Not lending.
Are you saying the jobs are out? When you say the benefit system needs to be changed, are you saying that young people aren't taking jobs that are available?
No, what I'm saying is that in order to create more, about 1 million new jobs have been created since the coalition came into power, but in order to create more of those jobs available to younger people who want to be on apprenticeships, who are on generally the lower salaries, you have to make sure that British businesses feel confident to invest their money in Britain. And not only British businesses, but actually the wealthy people that Labour hate.
We do not.
The wealthy people that Labour hate,
that is wrong.
those are the people that you really want to encourage to put their money into British businesses.
Simon.
Karen, the first things we need to do is make sure, with your help, that the people who leave school and college have the best skills possible. Yeah, that's the first thing. We've had over 500,000 young people out of work every year for the last 30 years under governments of all colours. Yeah, this is not a new problem. And thank God unemployment figures amongst young people are just coming down, having been going up for 8 years. Secondly, that's not just about technical skills, though we've been poor at that. It's about what are called soft skills. The ability to do interviews well, to look people in the eye, to shake hands, to dress properly, to turn up on time, to see, really, I'm serious. When I, like everybody else in this panel, looks at CVs, I want to know whether people can present their case well, whether they can spell, whether they spell change, whether they've done work experience, all that stuff. Thirdly, lots of young people say, I don't expect other people to give me a job, I want to do my own job. And that requires you to have the skill to do with financial education. Where do you get the money from, where do you get loans, where aren't you ripped off, all that stuff. But then I have just a list to finish with to give to Carib and his mates. Financial education, more apprenticeships, we've got more now than ever before. Green energy, great investment opportunity in this country. We've got wind, wave, tide, sun, all those, not so much sun, but the other side. Construction industry, the more building we can do, the more jobs there are. Europe, for heaven's sake, don't pull ourselves away. Europe is the best place for jobs and for expanding jobs, and if we broke away from Europe, we'd lose jobs. And lastly, we need redistribution of work. At the moment, lots of companies are reducing their workforce and paying the people at the top more money. They should hold their workforce and have more equal payment. They'd employ more and they'd get the job better done without driving people mad through overwork, mental breakdown and all the rest. It is possible, but it's the biggest challenge for this government, and the last 30 years of government have not cracked it.
Thank you very much. We didn't even get into Europe. We're almost done. I'm going to give you the last word. You asked the question. What do you want to come back and say? Can you give the microphone back to our question?
Obviously, I asked a question that I didn't think got answered, but I'm not going to get into that. For the last 30, you're saying for the last 30 years, you've been saying that you want to change things. I'm not sure you know exactly what A-levels are, but the fact that you've cancelled January exams doesn't help young people. For January exams, they could take exams and retake in June if they fail. That's number one. Number two, income tax. I currently work. I'm getting taxed income tax. That money could be saved up to pay for university. The money that you want me to spend on university could be paid for my mortgage in 5 years. So I don't see how anything...
If you're paying income tax, you're earning more than
no, I'm not
£5,000 a year?
No.
So you're not paying income tax?
But I am.
You're paying national insurance.
You're paying national insurance?
No, it's not national insurance.
You're paying income tax?
Yeah.
I'd get a new accountant.
All right. But obviously this ain't a laughing matter because I'm kind of being serious. So things have to change because it's just like you all seen a hamster on a wheel. It's like you look at us from your high positions as hamsters on a wheel that we're just running doing what you want us to do. You're talking about thriving businesses. No 18-year-old has a thriving business. You need to set some things up for young people to become able to be in that position. Apprenticeships can't do that at this young age. So if talking about thriving businesses when there's no positions within the business for young people to get into is a bit pointless because it has to do with something to help us, not you as a country.
Well, thank you. On that impassioned note, thank you very much indeed. And can I ask you to thank the panel for giving their time tonight as well. Thank you very much indeed. That's it.